The term edgy has lost its meaning, and for a long time now. You see that term passed around everywhere on the internet, whether if it's people describing certain shows, teenagers who try to be cool, or the dark humor section on 9gag. Hey, remember 9gag? What was once a word used to describe things that are provocative or avant-garde, edgy has become a subjective term for many individuals. I myself am edgy, and I have an appreciation for edgy things, but that also means that I have my own definition for the word. So how would I define edgy? Let me summarize it in this little montage. Alright, I think you understand well enough that it's not a phase, okay? I love edgy anime, which is why I was hyped to see the Goblin Slayer movie Goblin's Crown. The first season didn't really get me to value it highly at first, but after time it kind of grew on me, and right now I think of it as a pretty neat show. So after watching Goblin's Crown, did it manage to surpass its predecessor and meet my expectations? No, it did however get me in the mood for more edgy shows, and what I had lying in my watch list was one Magical Girl Sight, a show released back in the spring season of 2018. Magical Girl Sight was more or less described as a dark twist on the magical girl genre, a genre I haven't engrossed myself in, unless if you count Powerpuff Girls. So this being my first magical girl anime, it felt like my experience from this show would be the deciding factor of whether I'll be sailing into the moon of a genre that is magical girls. The story starts off with our main protagonist, Aya Asagiri, attempting to commit suicide by jumping at an oncoming train. Already off to a good start. Just from this, we already get to know the tone that this show is trying to set. A dark psychological high school anime. At least that's what it made you think. But of course, after that failed endeavor, the audience should be wondering what caused this girl to reach that certain point. And that's what the whole first episode tried to show, with different methods of physical and mental harm ranging from being treated like trash at school to being treated like a punching bag at home. And in my opinion, it didn't try to present itself as this pretentiously brutal show. It has its scenes of torture and shock, but it knows what to show and where to cut. I was surprised by the lack of edge that was happening. I was expecting more gore and more torture for the sake of torture. So far, it was fairly adequate. But let's go back a bit. How did I happen to stumble upon this anime? Well, I can't really recall where I found it, but I vaguely remember watching a video recommending it to me. It showed the clip of a girl being drowned on a toilet, clearly being bullied. Now, being an edgelord who indulges in bloodbaths and boobies, of course this show piqued my interest. I decided to look it up on Mal and read the reviews for it, and oh boy did it catch my eye. The reviews for the show were polarizing to say the least. People either thought it was a masterpiece, giving it a 10, or thought it was absolute garbage, giving it a 1. This made me more intrigued as to why this anime was so divisive amongst audiences. You have my curiosity, but now you have my attention. So of course, I just had to watch the show. And that leads us back to the first episode. Again, I had no issues on how they handled edginess in the first episode. There was a couple of shock factors here and there, but I wouldn't call them lazy as to how they presented it. It really just readies you on the type of atmosphere the show is gonna take. To some extent, it kind of dumbs down the shock value, so it really seems like there won't be much shock. Oh Jesus, is that comical relief moment? What the? Were they being self-aware just now? Yep, that really caught me off guard. Because of the way the first episode was presented, it gave the impression that this was just gonna be an unforgiving, ruthless edge fest. And first impressions are important. You come in with a dark psychological high school show, I would think that this is gonna be a dark psychological show throughout. Which is why the sudden hint of lighthearted and comical moments come in as a subtle subversion of expectations. And this slightly lighthearted tone takes its pace throughout a couple episodes. Not really interrupting the flow, but rather distracting you from the initial angst of the show. It again catches you unsuspectingly and makes for a good shock. The kind of shock that is actually well written and not just for the sake of shock. And despite how sudden the tone of the show can change, you never really feel like it's going off track. It's always consistent. This also goes for our characters and their motivations. Some of them actually use their heads. One of them knew about a certain grudge another character holds, so she took advantage of it and tried to manipulate her. There was another instance where a character becomes ill for using too much of her powers, and initially I just didn't think of it too hard, not realizing that it was actually some sly foreshadowing that the character had planned, and at the same time it ties into another subplot. Which is another thing that the show does. It sets up a bunch of characters and along the way they bump into each other in a natural way that also serves to progress the story. A really ingenious method of writing a story. There were a lot of things in this anime I initially thought I hated, but soon just ended up loving it. One was Aya's character, which I initially thought she was just gonna remain as this powerless coward, but she actually had some character development throughout. There was also that beach episode, which fell out of place at first, but I can't really write it off as a problem because they actually had mentioned it in a previous episode, therefore actually foreshadowing it. I thought I was gonna hate that episode, but it ended up as being one of the better ones in the whole series, with a really amusing ending to one of the subplots. They really did pay attention to detail when making the story because there are some character decisions and situations that would and should be considered as stupid, but they get away with it because they just happen to mention this certain quirk before. Honestly, they get away with a lot of stuff. Everything just seems to make sense and they don't leave any plot holes. Well, except for the actual plot holes that are supposedly for future seasons. One thing to note though is that the latter half of the show takes a more comical route compared to the psychological and bleak tone the first one tried to set. In some aspects this may appear as a problem, but whoa, is that an Avengers reference? But personally, it didn't bother me too much. I did wish that the anime committed to that psychological aspect throughout, but nonetheless it was still entertaining, so I won't complain. I think most people who dislike the show did so because of the first episode. But I can understand if the anime as a whole is just not your cup of tea. Personally, I enjoyed it. If they were to make a second season, I will definitely have that on my watch list. And I think this show became a gateway for me to watch more magical girl anime. I mean, I had to choose this over Cardcaptor Sakura, so I guess I know what I'm watching next. As my first magical girl anime, it was a fun ride and I was really invested in its story. So if you're okay with a little blood, a little bit of psychological torment, give this show a try. Who knows, you might become the next edgelord. Actually, I'll be holding on to that title for longer. You can be my Edge Thane. But with all that said, let me know what you guys thought of this video. I tried a different approach to writing and I'm trying to make it better than my previous uploads. So please give it a like if you did, and I'll see you guys in my next video.